Have you ever come across some sloping bedrock like this and thought, oh, this would be a great spot for a wall, but then you had no idea how to make one?
Me too, but I built one anyway.
So I took this piece of land from this, via this, to this.
And in this video, I'll show you how I did it with no prior experience as a 99% one-man job with no heavy machinery, using formwork blocks and a lot of sweat.
Why formwork blocks? Let's see what a retaining wall is. You start with sloping terrain, you put up a wall, and then you fill in behind the wall. That way you get a flat surface which the wall then retains. Meanwhile, the weight of the backfill will exert tremendous force on the back of the wall, so to keep all this from sliding out, you need this wall to be really strong. And there are a few ways to make sure of just that. The simplest solution is to simply stack blocks. And there are concrete blocks made to purpose, shaped roughly like this, with a lip interlocking behind with the next layer below it. It's inexpensive and easy to build, although it needs a good foundation to hold up. But they can hold quite the load from behind, but since everything is stacked, it's not the most durable solution. On the other end of the scale, on the same slope, you could build a monolithic concrete wall. This would be the hardiest approach as it facilitates both inherently stable geometries and the best protection against water. Using rebar both vertically and horizontally, with an unbroken protective layer of concrete around, this, done right, can last centuries. However, it also takes skill to do it right, and I do not have that level of skill. That's where this comes in handy. It provides a middle ground where you build your base, and on this slope you just stack your blocks one atop the other, like Legos, but now with rebar inside, and you pour your concrete into those blocks. It's a lot cheaper and easier than the concrete wall, but also more durable than stacked blocks. The thing with concrete walls is that unlike formwork blocks, you have to build your formwork, and formwork is hard. Placing rebar inside it correctly is also hard, and if you don't get it right, you lose all those inherent benefits. So that's why we're cheating using these blocks. The design of your block is not super important. Some are made from a couple of chambers. I prefer this design. The main thing is to find something for which there's solid technical documentation. Something you could download from the manufacturer's website, preferably vetted by a government body or technical institute, detailing things like the recommended foundation width and thickness, and placement and thickness of your rebar. Based on your wall's planned height, you should find a table telling you how far apart the rebar should be, as well as the thickness of the bars. This is most of the stuff you'll need for this project, except for concrete, which I'll cover separately later. You'll need your formwork blocks and appropriate rebar, and a rotary hammer drill bit, a couple of millimeters wider than the diameter of the bar. You'll also need a rotary hammer for that bit. Next, you'll need several lengths of 2x4 sheets of plywood, various lengths of screws and the bits to fasten them, and of course a drill. You need perforated steel sheets to reinforce your joints, some plastic risers, a measuring tape and pencil, and some bubble levels. You'll need one long and one very short, and it's also helpful if these are as lightweight as possible. You'll need a circular saw, duct tape, some kind of anchoring adhesive like this 2-component anchor fix, and a way to get it into deep holes. crowbar or pry bar, and a power washer, and an angle grinder with discs for both steel and concrete. Now, I'll expect you to know how to use all of this safely and read the manuals for any power tools, but please do not skimp on PPE. A mask like this is a bare minimum for protecting your lungs, but I strongly recommend something like this for both comfort and safety. Without proper protection in a project like this, you will get permanent hearing loss and you might become blind or get seriously injured. Apart from all these need to haves, there are also some neat nice to haves, like a jigsaw, a portable low pressure washer, and a multi tool. But apart from the actual concrete and mixer, this is everything a wall like this takes to make. Almost forgot, you also need a shovel, some very important pipe for drainage, a hole saw for that pipe, and metal wire, which I forgot about. But let's go. The first step is, of course, to dig. This part isn't rocket science, just grab a shovel and go. Next, when you have a nice ditch excavated where you want your wall to go, comes an important part. You need to figure out where to put your rebar. And to do so, I am using my formwork blocks as guides. In sloping terrain, simply putting the blocks end to end would lead to run-on displacement issues. And that's why I'm using a bubble level along with these risers which I'm using to level the blocks. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect in all directions, you just need it straight enough. Straight enough for what? For these little holes, which will house your rebar, to line up well enough with the hollow block sections. But if you don't do any leveling, as you can probably tell, it'll be real easy to get serious misalignment. Grab some risers, stick them under a block, and make sure it's close enough to level that you won't get any run-on displacement issue 10 blocks down the road. You also want to make sure that it's level enough sideways that you're not going to drill your rebar hole behind or in front of the block. Also note that at this point you're not going to be drilling all the way down. The holes I'm making now are basically pilot holes, which will be helpful later. When you're drilling in rock, you'll be generating a lot of this really fine rock dust, which flies around and gets everywhere, and you do not want to breathe this stuff. I've now come to a section where you can tell that I need to curve my line of blocks slightly to the right. Otherwise this end would meet the opposite end down there, so we need to make a bend. You can also tell by this plank I've laid down as a rough guide, this line cannot continue straight ahead. So instead of having this line continue straight ahead, I'm going to have to cut a roughly this size section out of the next block, which will let me angle the whole thing to the right. And that means it's time for the angle grinder. Now these things are loud, and you will make sure your protections are fully sealed up. I also prefer to shoot the dust away from me, as, yes, it does blow up a bigger plume, but I'll be bringing my clothes inside afterwards, and I don't want all that dust following me in. Alright, all done. Now, you see I cut a diagonal line here, which will go against this straight face, right? It's going to be flush, so when I lift this block up, it's going to follow the line we saw earlier. Just get it up and we'll have our curve. Now I lifted the block up using some bricks and risers, and we can see it's not perfect. There's a sizable gap at the top here, but the level tells me we're not too far off. And while this is a tricky spot, looking straight down the end of this block, you can see that we're going to end up roughly where we want to be. And pulling the plank up as well, we can use that to aim down, and we don't have so far left that run-on displacement problems is going to be a problem anymore for real. can just drill some more holes and we'll soon be at the end. And that was where I should have been paying more attention, because if you have one of these tools with a reversible switch, like this, you actually need to pay attention to which way it's set, because in these holes I just went backwards and backwards and backwards without even noticing, because the switch was put in the wrong position. So I found another issue in this spot, in that drilling straight down turned out to not really be an option. So instead, I'm going in diagonally. Instead of going, straight down, I'm drilling at an angle. But that's okay, because when I ram my rebar in there, I'll be able to bend it straight up with little issues, so it'll come out straight up through these blocks anyway. We now have most of these pilot holes in place exactly where they need to be for the rebar to fit through all of the blocks. But here, at the very end, we have found a really tricky spot. So what we do is we put the long bubble level down to where we want to go, because right here it's just too steep to put block, block, block like before. Instead we start at the last hole we did drill, and we use the bubble level to make sure our line out is level, and we can then find the right distance for the next holes and just follow the line of the level. Next up, and this is something which should work no matter the design of block you're using, you put down several blocks in a line, you find a middle and the place where they join and the middle of the next, and then you just measure. And I've got 25 centimeter from middle to joint and 25 from joint to middle, so that's my distance. Then we can start at our last hole and go 25 centimeters down the line of the level, and that's our distance out to where we need to drill. But you also want to make sure you find the right spot sideways along the line, and that's where you can use the smaller level. And there we are. Next hole is done, and you can see we just put back in the block we cut for the curve, and then we're back on track. Now I could have used the same method to find the next spots or use a wire or a laser, but I just really prefer this method of making sure using the blocks. So I'll keep doing that until the end. After some rain, but with all the pilot holes in place, we can move on to preparing makeshift formwork for the foundation. The recommended thickness for my height of wall is a 15 to 20 centimeter base, with a width of about 50 to 60 centimeters. Now, since we are building on bedrock, that recommendation is a bit overkill. In other places, a base needs to be wide enough to distribute the weight of the wall to the dirt below, and thick enough to not crack while doing so. But as we're building on bedrock, there is no dirt below. Even so, you do have to take care when building your base, as this example shows. This is a very low retaining wall, built under similar conditions to mine, which has suffered a near catastrophic failure. The formwork blocks have cracked apart, the rebar inside is exposed and rusting, and I don't really want to stand too close to this thing, even though it's not high. So while I won't be adhering strictly to the recommended dimension for the base, I'll keep this wall in mind as an example of what can happen if you don't take care in your prep work. And, at least try to keep it as thick as reasonable. To begin, I place down the plywood which will make up the inside of the form, and I then find the 15 centimeter mark at the highest spot where the base will be the thinnest. I then take my long bubble level, set it at that mark, and use it to find a level line along the plywood, where I'll next cut it to shape, using the level as a ruler. Now back in the ditch, the first piece of wood is cut, marked, and level on top. And the top being level is really vital, since this is where our blocks will be resting. But we also have some gaping holes on the bottom of this plank, which isn't really great, and this plywood is really just standing loose. To start fixing both of those issues, the easiest way is to just take some cut-off pieces and slide them in behind, while making sure we keep the top level. Then we'll also start connecting pieces of this makeshift formwork together. Now I've stuck one bit behind this sheet to seal off the bottom, and it's time to screw it into place. Note that the only thing keeping this even a little stable right now is the packed earth behind it. You'll also note that as we move down the ditch, our base is becoming a lot thicker than it needs to be, and at this point we've got 35 centimeters, more than twice of what we need. And this is a great spot to shave off 20 centimeters and slope the foundation down. To do so, I've made a mark at 15 centimeters thickness down here, which I'll use to cut a line up to the current top of the base. There we go, 20 centimeters shaved off. But why did I decide on cutting only when I could take off 20 centimeters and not before? The reason is that that's the exact height of my formwork blocks. So when it's time to stack these, I can just cut a single block along a diagonal and keep going. You'll see when we get there. Future me here, and as it turns out, that was not exactly what happened. When I made that cut, I quite simply forgot to account for the sloping terrain. So at the bottom we were indeed 15 centimeters up from the ground, and at the top we were 35. However, I did not check the level here at the bottom of this plywood board. Hence, as you can see from this line, which is leveled now with the next step down on the foundation, the actual drop I ended up making was not 20, but 25 centimeters. At this late stage, that's a bit of a problem, as I've gotten all the way around with the back of the formwork, and slicing off 5 centimeters of formwork that way would leave too thin a base, making that not an option. So I'm going to have to shave off the bottom of some of these blocks, which will end up making the entire wall 5 centimeters lower than planned. But you live, you learn. Now, back to the original timeline. Right now, I just want to point out that this is of course not how you build proper formwork. It's flimsy, it's unstable, and it's likely to shift and bulge when filled. But for this, that matters little. This line needs to be level, and I just need to keep it level while working, and to make it level across before stacking blocks on top of the finished base. Another way to build is to use planks side by side and then level off afterwards using a circular saw. This is not solid enough for that, but for minor adjustments like removing this section, a jigsaw works great. There we are, and the base will follow this line, but now this won't get as much in the way anymore. Right angle corners can be tricky, so what I did here after finding the line to follow was put down this piece of plywood held in place by a brick as a rough guide. Then I leveled, and then I cut, and I will now screw into place this next piece. So with the brick in place and this corner touching, I'll just check that we're level, as always, and then use some, some 2x4s to create a solid connection. It's also important to recognize that when you're tired, you're gonna need breaks. I did not, and as a result, this slope ends up being 4 centimeters too short, which translates into this whole section and everything following it being 4 centimeters too short. And I only discovered when I got around and was going to make the partner board, I figured I'd cut my 20 centimeters not vertically but diagonally. Still, nothing a little elbow grease can't fix. And rather than tearing everything down and redoing it, I added those missing centimeters using these metal bracers I got for reinforcing my joints to fix everything into place. This should hold up nicely because while concrete is heavy, most of the pressure will be at the bottom. And speaking of, down here are some screws poking through to the inside of the form, which isn't great. Stuff like this should be avoided, and if that's not an option, they should be shaved off, lest they become a weakness to the finished foundation. A multi-tool is perfect for this kind of task, because it's smaller and lighter than an angle grinder, and also less likely to light everything on fire. I know I said less likely, but this still gets hot. And as I had some sparks and some pieces of hot metal fly off into the underbrush, I immediately hosed the area down after I was done cutting. And another shower won't hurt, so... You should really always have some water handy when working with these kinds of tools. As the formwork gets closer to its final shape, I'm also adding reinforcement. Some in ready-made shapes and others with plates I've just bent into the right shape, just by hand. But over here, I'm still missing the brace for the other end of this 2x4. And the angle up there isn't quite 90 degrees, it's more like 110. So I need to open up a 90 degrees piece just a little. And I thought I'd show you a trick if you need to bend some steel and you can't do it by hand. You can instead make a lever. So I got this 90 degrees piece screwed into these 2x4s. And I can just take this, place a foot on one end and gently push the other end with one hand. And you can see I'm easily bending this into shape. So this should fit very nicely up there. Now the formwork is almost done, and while it's still way too fragile for building a full wall, it's gotten a lot more stable. Connecting all the pieces together strengthens it, and the reinforced joints really help. So we're not too far off from pouring concrete in here, and when we do, two things will happen. First, the concrete may try to lift the whole construction up, and it'll also push extremely hard outwards. But thanks to these 2x4s, I can now take all this dirt and shovel it down, compacting it outside the walls of the form. That'll keep the walls from bulging too much with the packed dirt behind them. And down here, that same dirt will push down on these 2x4s, keeping everything in place. There's just a single piece of preparation we should do before packing that dirt. At the very start, I mentioned you need some pipe, and now is the time to start thinking of where to place it. The thing is, if we just build this base with concrete right now, it's going to act as a reservoir for rainwater, which would collect behind the base and, wanting to go this way, over time erode the very foundation of the wall, if not toppling it outright. Another complication of building on bedrock instead of permeable dirt. But I've been lucky enough to get some rain as I've been building this, and after first power washing the ditch, it becomes really easy to see where the water naturally wants to go. And down here you can see yesterday's rain seeping through the terrain, making its way down and out here. Over here we have a similar spot, where there's a bit of moisture, revealing where water from behind my base naturally wants to go. So these are prime locations for putting in some holes, a sort of French drain, and eventually, but not yet, we'll cut some holes in this plywood and pull some pipe through them. But we need to pay attention to a couple of things, like these rebar holes. it's important that your rebar is covered by at least 3 to 4 centimeters of concrete on all sides. So our 5 centimeter pipe should pass between these holes to maximize that rebar's coverage. Running it across the holes is obviously impossible, but you also don't want it directly next to the rebar. So, keeping that in mind, let's mark where we want our backside holes to go. Future holes marked, and I know for a fact that this is an area water will gravitate towards. But that's not all I need to know. Using the level, I also need to check that water will run out through the pipe as opposed to the other way around. And this is looking to be a pretty good drop, so that's great. Next, I know my pipe is 5 centimeters wide, and I want at least as much concrete above it as that diameter for strength. On the opposite side, where I'll eventually put in my exit hole, I'll also want to ensure coverage, but for now we're good. But these holes are the reason I'm not marking it down quite yet, as I want to be certain that the rebar and pipe won't end up too close. And down here there's another mark, and confirming with the level, we see water will still flow out if we put the pipe parallel to the ground. And this decline will be at least a couple of percent steep, which is what you want to aim for to make sure water will get out instead of clogging the pipe with dirt. Now, what you might be wondering is, I'll get a pipe there and another here, how many do I need? So I measured this whole area, everything behind the wall, plus any terrain sloping inwards towards it, to find the watershed for my wall. And since I already did some extreme drainage further up, it's only about 30 square meters. Now, the rainfall record in my region is some 5 centimeters in 30 minutes, so prepping for 2 such record half hours in a row, that's 10 centimeters per hour, or 3 cubic meters of water. That means putting one 5 centimeter pipe here and another one there should in theory be able to deal with all of it. But these aren't the lowest points, plus it would force my water trying to escape through to just 2 points, which would be bad. So I'll put down several more, both for redundancy and load balancing to prevent foundation erosion, and also pack some dirt. I've now packed dirt tight behind the formwork, except in the spots where I'll be making my French drains. Now, this should be solid enough not to go anywhere or move around, which means we can start preparing for actual placement of the rebar. And since the top of this whole form is now level, the easiest way is to put something flat straight across it. Next, grab your measure, stick it onto a pilot hole, and find the distance to the top of the form. If you do this for each of the pilot holes you've drilled, you can simply mark down the distance you find right on the wall with your pencil. Like right here. The top of these 2 walls are perfectly level, not just lengthwise like this, but also with one another. So putting something across, I can find that the bottom of my blocks will be resting some 25 centimeters from the top of the pilot hole, minus the thickness of this wood piece. And accounting for that as the base thickness, plus the final depth of the rebar hole, and adding the height of the levels of blocks I want to put in, which will be 3 up here, I can find the precise necessary length for every single piece of rebar. So I guess it's time for more angle grinding. Even though we've had some rain, I've hosed down this work area good, because this thing is a fire hazard. In addition, I'll be spraying the sparks down as I cut, so I'm wearing fireproof clothes to avoid getting burnt. Finally, you don't want your workpiece flopping around, so while this setup isn't great, it should do the trick. Ah, freshly cut steel. This is pretty hot stuff. In hindsight, I realized some really big bolt cutters might have been less of a hassle. But anyway, on the length of your rebar. Like I said, you need to account for both depth of hole, thickness of base, and height of blocks. But you don't want the rebar to reach all the way to the top of your wall either. Like I said earlier, a minimum of 3 to 4 centimeters of concrete coverage for all steel is your target, and that applies up top as well. And since my top blocks will see the least amount of lateral stress from the backfill, I'm happy keeping the top of the bars a full 10 centimeters from the top of the topmost block, or halfway up its height. With all my bars cut to length, it's time to start getting them in the ground, by drilling out these holes to full depth. But first you'll see why I only made tiny holes to begin with. Because as I've been working, there's been dirt and mud getting into these holes. Well, you want them clean and dry for your final rebar. Even more important, I can now see if any hole ended up too close to my finished formwork sides. But this looks fine throughout, so I can just start drilling. The final depth I want to reach for each of my holes is 25 centimeters, which I've also preset using this guide rod. But drilling in granite is quite hard work and takes time, and while it's fully doable with a battery-powered tool, it would take approximately forever. So I've gone out and rented myself a more powerful machine, which should cut down the time spent drilling to maybe just 8 hours or so. It's a significant improvement. And should you ever get your drill bit stuck in the bedrock, I wish you good hydraulics, good luck, and lots of creativity. I will say no more on this matter. As your holes get done, you'll also want to brush away this rock dust so it doesn't fall in. And I know you could also use pressurized air to blow them clean, but that is a level of detail even I won't bother with. The main point is to just keep them dry and as free of dirt as is practically possible. Speaking of dirt, you also want your rebar clean before the next step, and the easiest way by far is using a power washer at the highest power setting. It won't remove surface rust, but that's not an issue, you'll always get that. Flaking rust or dirt is what you're getting rid of now. And if you have any oil spills, you should also get that degreased off, but that's also not a problem I have. With all my rebar clean and dry, I've started affixing it to the bedrock, and I'm using an epoxy to make sure it stays. This stuff is a 2-component chemical which mixes inside the nozzle, giving you just a couple of minutes work time per bar maximum before it sets. That means when you pop one of these, you really have to keep working constantly until it's empty, or any leftovers will be an expensive waste. The epoxy is also temperature sensitive, so it sets faster in warmer weather. That also means you should probably let your boreholes cool off before applying it. I at least gave it a full day. Anyway, it's hard to gauge exactly how much you need to squirt into each hole at first, so I can show you how I did it. With a couple of pumps, I pushed the bar all the way down while twisting it around, and you can tell the epoxy is not covering the full depth. Holding the bar off the ground, I give the hole another pump and push the bar back down. Now you also see why this stuff asks you to wear safety glasses. Air bubbles forming inside the hole will throw out this chemical goo with surprising range and power, since there's a very tight fit between the steel and the rock. But with a 4th pump, it seems I have enough stuff to cover the bar all the way from bottom to surface. With all my vertical rebar in place, it's finally time to finish the single most important part of this whole project, the drainage. But in the beginning, I showed you the hole saw for cutting through plywood, which I only now realize I cannot use. This would not let me get flush with the ground, which I need to be when I make the intake holes for my pipes. So I had to get a new one. Very sad. But the marks on the rear wall are already in place, so now I can just start cutting. And I'm using a low speed setting on my drill here so as to not dull the blade or cause a fire. With the intake hole cut, I'll now use a perfectly straight piece of leftover rebar to find where the exit hole should be. Holding this down, as if it were the bottom of my pipe, it accounts for any uneven bumps in the terrain, showing me where this hole needs to go, and down here I can see it needs to be a little bit up from the ground. And of course I've also put this down to pass perfectly in between the now permanently fixed vertical rebar. So now it's time to get some pipe in here.